What if I told you there's a world out there with the most beautiful gleaming colors? A world full of mesmerizing treasures, where you find joy and purity and abundance. What if I told you that you could find an endless universe within yourself? Are you ready for a journey? Then come with us and discover the colors of the universe. Welcome to the Colors of the Universe here on KMPQ Ascension Radio. I'm Evie, your host today, and my guest is Dr. Marcel Polte, an attorney from Germany who wrote books on topics such as ritual abuse and MKULTRA. Hi, and welcome.
Hi, Evie. Thank you to have me on your show, and I'm looking forward to talking to you about the subjects you mentioned.
Thank you for coming. Would you like to introduce yourself a bit more?
Yes, sure. As you mentioned, I'm an attorney. I worked for about 15 years in international law firms. But besides my job as an attorney, I was always very interested in the beginning in physics. I read a lot of physics books and even studied for some time besides my lawyer job at a university to get a certain background or basis for my research, and then came to the to other subjects that I researched, the UFO phenomenon, but also to the subject of so-called ritual abuse, and found there's a connection to MKULTRA, which I researched from a German perspective, but also from the US or English-speaking perspective. So my main job is this as a lawyer, but very busy in with other topics as well.
Before we go into detail, can you tell us about how you researched for the books and what kind of evidence did you look at?
That's a very important question, because as we all know, for example, in the internet, you find a lot of information about a wide range of topics, and normally you also find at least 50% disinformation or false information, and normally can never be sure what to think about this information. Therefore, the sources are the most important aspects if you want to research any topic. And this was something I was very surprised that we already have a large amount of very reliable, very consistent data on this topic of ritual abuse. And before I talk about it, I should first give like a short definition what is meant by this. When we talk about ritual abuse in Germany, if you translate it, it would be called ritual violence. You're talking about family structures in which follow a usually satanic agenda, which means those family members, which are also organized in local cults, they are worshiping Satan, or in some cases also other evil entities or gods. And in those family structures, everything is aiming at making the own children to later perpetrators. So from birth on, those cult members are using very sophisticated and you can say unbelievable techniques to bring an innocent child to a point in his life where this child later on becomes a perpetrator herself, which means this child learns to abuse first maybe animals, later other children, to torture them and even to kill them. And the techniques used to achieve this are using very complicated psychological mechanisms, which I will, which I could describe before we come to the data. For example, or to the sources. For example, the most spread technique is that you have to know when a person, and in this case a child, is brought into a near-death experience by way of abuse, by way of torture, by extreme situations where this child is very afraid and thinks he has to die and has no chance to survive this situation. In such a situation, a psychological coping mechanism comes into effect. In such a situation, the child will learn to dissociate. A mild form of dissociation is, and we all know this from accident reports, if someone has an accident, it happens quite often that the person cannot remember the exact time of the accident or what happened during the accident, because his psyche is deleting this information in order to protect the person, because if he would always remember what happened to him or her in this maybe traumatic experiences, he would have or she would have problems to deal with his or her daily life. And the most extreme form of dissociation, and this is something that only works with children, and one says up to the age of 8 or 9 years, is that in such a near-death situation, the personality splits of this person, of this child, and another personality part emerges in order to take all the pain, all the fear, and all those horrible impressions to take them over, and in order to protect the core personality. So the core personality does not have to go any longer to this or through this horrible situation, but this new personality part helps somehow. And by this technique, it's possible to produce a large number of such personality parts. And what happens is that the person has something which is called in psychology multiple personality disorder, now called dissociative identity disorder. So this is a kind of psychological disease, you can say, which is accepted by mainstream psychology. These are no I don't know, fairy tales or something, or something which does not exist in reality, but it's you have now dozens of books on the subject of multiple personality disorder, and what the perpetrators are doing is they take this new personality parts which arise, and they are conditioning them with known means by using, for example, pain. Like you can condition a animal to do a certain trick, for example, and by this technique they are able to produce a number of personality parts for special purposes. For example, one personality part which is able to take part or even lead a satanic ritual, or another personality part which is only used for child pornography or child prostitution. And those personality parts learn in detail how to behave by conditioning in such a situation and by using certain triggers. The perpetrators or other persons that are informed about those triggers are able to call those personality parts for their special needs. And this is, in short, what is understood by ritual abuse. And now it's no surprise that you come to the question, can this be true? And what evidence do we have that something like those satanic cults abusing children and splitting the personality of children and performing satanic rituals where children or babies are sacrificed, often by other children or by their own mothers? Can this be true? And I was very surprised to find that all the information on this topic in detail with all the horrific aspects you find in the literature by therapists. And you find it in the literature by US therapists, but also by German therapists. And what they are writing about the experiences that they gathered often over a number of years by working with survivors of such satanic cults is in detail the same. Always the same patterns emerge. The same techniques of splitting up personality are described. The same inner persons are described, which are produced for certain tasks. There are even inner persons that never appear in the outside, you can say, but that only have to fulfill first certain tasks in the inner world of those persons. For example, one inner person may have the task to report to the cult in case this person speaks to outsiders or goes to a therapist to work on his behavior issues, often not knowing or normally not knowing that he or she has experienced ritual abuse. Normally, those memories come in the late 30s for the first time because the subconscious very effectively blocks out those most horrible memories that you can imagine. Yeah? And this was very, very astonishing, but on the other hand, a very good or the best proof for the reality of those crimes reported by survivors, because the authors are psychiatrists or psychologists and come from all over the world. And furthermore, in the meanwhile, we also have studies that were executed on the topic where hundreds of, for example, therapists had to fill out questionnaires, and where the authors of those surveys gathered much data that also corroborated this picture. And in Germany, we also have a official committee that was initiated by the German Parliament that is dealing with abuse subjects, but also in particular with ritual abuse. And they also made some scientific publications describing what they found out. And there you found all the aspects that you also can find in the US, that this happens in family structures, that the perpetrators use those sophisticated mind control techniques, and so on. And in last year in August, it was in August 2020. Even a major German newspaper, the so-called Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung, FAZ, published a long article about a whole page on the subject of personality split, and mentioned those cults in this context. And they even cited a number of statements by survivors that were collected by this government or official commission or advisory committee, which I mentioned, where those survivors in detail said that, for example, the perpetrators are coming from influential society, parts of the society, that they have a lot of money and a lot of influence, which enables them to cover the crimes, and so on. So you can say we now have, with the data by all those therapists, with the data surveys, for example, you find the extreme abuse survey, you find it online in English as well, where one part, the professional extreme abuse survey, addressed therapists or persons working professionally with survivors, where you can look up all this data. And so you can say, together with all the survivors' accounts, there is absolutely no doubt that this is a real phenomenon. It is not just a satanic panic, which was the term coined by the US media in the 90s, when a lot of those survivors' accounts and therapist reports emerged for the first time. And so, we have to deal with a worldwide, very astonishing and very cruel phenomenon.
Yeah, and is MKUltra and ritual abuse something that always goes together, or
No.
can it be separated?
Yeah, I would say usually those are two separate subjects. Dr. Corrigan Hammond was asked in his so-called Greenbaum speech, and every hearer or viewer should look up Greenbaum's speech. You still found the transcript of his speech, which is a very important document. Although Dr. Hammond was forced to pull back his speech afterwards. He was threatened and intimidated not to talk anymore about it, because it was groundbreaking what he told the public during this conference. And he was asked, how could it be that we find the same techniques in cult survivors and also in MKUltra survivors? And he said there is a common, how's it called? He said there's one combining aspect, and this is Satanism. What he wanted to say is that for sure in satanic cults, you're dealing with Satanists. But he also found out, or at least suspected, that those in the leading positions in the CIA that oversaw MKUltra were Satanists themselves, not officially, but this, for example, explained why high military officials used their own family members, which means children, in the program. Normally, you will think, no way that a military official, don't know, a general or whatever, takes a member of his own family in such a program. But from the perspective of those Satanists, it makes sense, because their biggest aim is, or purpose is, that they want to hand over this agenda in their own family, to make their own children, like I said before, become later perpetrators. So this explains why therapists found out, and Dr. Corinne Hammond speaks about this, why some of his patients had family members with high positions in the intelligence community or in the military. So therefore, you have to say, as a basic rule, those are two subjects. On the one hand, you have those satanic family structures that are working in satanic cults, doing rituals and so on. And you have the CIA and the military working with MKULTRA. This has, in the first instance, nothing to do formally with Satanism. However, you can say behind all this, you have the Satanism, but the major purpose in the intelligence and military context is that you have children that you can use, for example, for child pornography, for snuff films. Katy Groves is a survivor speaking on the internet about her experiences in this. And they use it for example, military purposes or intelligence purposes as well, those children. However, you can say the victims have often experienced both. They have experienced violence in MKUltra, but also violence in the satanic cults, but in different surroundings, you can say. For example, Katy Groves comes out of a family with a satanic background, where his own father was a victim as well, and later became her perpetrator. Interestingly enough, her father also speaks of Dr. Green or Joseph Mengele, and is perceiving him as a kind of god or godfather. And this is also a common pattern of some of those survivors, that Dr. Green has built up a very strong bond with those victims. Often he uses so-called love bombing in the first years of those children. He spent much time with them, cared for them, read out of English or German fairy tale books. And so the victims became dependent on him. But then at a sudden point in time, he switched over to abuse and torture. And this is also an important technique that the caretaker, often the own parents, at some point during this mind control process, beginning to torture their own children, because by this the child absolutely loses his or her confidence in other persons. As a baby and as a toddler, by nature, you have to rely on your parents to survive. So it's a normal human trait that a baby totally 100% relies and confides in his or her own parents. And by you can say by killing this confidence in the own caretaker and the own parent, in this moment, this person loses this confidence or this ability to ever in his life again have confidence in another person. And this is repeated later on as a technique in the mind control process, that maybe later on they give the child a possibility to run away and to talk to a parent, a policeman, all staged. And in the end, this policeman is also a cult member, and which in the first moment seems to be a helper, in the end is once again a torturer of this child. And so by those kind of experiences, these persons will never ever, even as adults, be able again to have confidence or to trust in other persons, which is also a means to protect the cult, because they can be sure those persons, even as an adult, won't go anymore to the next police station and tell them anything.
Yeah, I didn't know that. There are also different forms or levels of MKUltra, like alpha, beta, delta, and so on.
Yeah. Those names, alpha, beta, delta, are not, you cannot say different levels, but those are, in the meanwhile, known names for certain inner personality parts. And therapists found out that, for example, under the so-called alpha program, it contains something like a basic programming tool. The beta part is the part which is conditioned for sexual services like child prostitution and child pornography. And for example, maybe I should explain this. I mentioned before child pornography and child abuse in the context of the CIA, and this is done to get money for their projects. For example, Katy Groves describes in detail how snuff films, which are films where children or also adults are abused and tortured until death. So the most horrible form of abuse and crime you can imagine. And she describes how such snuff films are produced in certain facilities run by the military or parts of the military and the CIA. I think one is called, under those insiders, Uncle Sam's Snuff Factory. And by offering such productions in the dark web, apparently not only the cults, but also military and CIA are able to earn a lot of money for their black projects. So these are widespread means, especially in the cults, to finance themselves. And and so you have other personality parts. For example, the Theta personality part is said to be a part where psychic abilities are trained. For example, certain survivors describe that the CIA was interested not only in remote viewing, which is now backed up by thousands of CIA documents, which you can look at even at the CIA's own homepage, because they were published under the Freedom of Information Act. So it's now 100% proven that the CIA worked with so-called remote viewing, which means a person is able to achieve information about, for example, other persons or a situation or a location via psychic means, which means independent of the distance and even the time when this target has happened. And they apparently, the CIA, were not only interested very much in this remote viewing, which was conducted in the so-called Project Stargate and other projects that you can find in the CIA papers, but also in making a person, or in this program, to make children able to harm other persons by psychic means. Some survivors describe it. And this is, for example, the Theta programming, or the Delta program is aiming at conditioning later, what's it called? Persons for example, terrorist or terrorist attacks and military tasks, you can say. So we now have a very clear overview over the programs used by the CIA, about the functions of the certain inner persons that are produced. And this, on the other hand, is a very good corroboration, because if a therapist finds out in the therapy that there are certain certain inner persons that are named alpha, beta, delta, and so on, they can be very sure this is not just imagination, but that they found another MKUltra survivor.
So one person can be used for the different programs.
Yes, because it's able via the mere triggers, and the trigger can be a word, a trigger can be a certain touch, a certain smell, to bring in the forefront a certain personality part. So therapists have found in some cases that there are dozens of inner persons in one and the same person. And I talked to, for example, a German psychiatrist, it's a psychologist, working with some survivors of cults, and he's still shocked if during a therapy session his patient, which is a lady of 30 years, or which is who is in her 30s, if she has one of those so-called switches, which means a personality part is changes, and suddenly a minute before or a second before, he was talking to a woman of 35 years, and in the next moment there's a small child of maybe 3 or 4 years before him, or someone behaving like a child of 3 or 4 years, with the speech, with the all aspects of behavior which a child has, because some of those inner persons have not become adults in the meanwhile. They stayed in this childlike state, maybe because they have always been in the background and only brought in front for some certain tasks, like child abuse, and were not used anymore, but they still exist in the psyche of this person, and are still a personality part. And therapists also found out, and this shows that this is not just an imagination by the patients, that even certain diseases or certain abilities can be attributed to the certain inner persons. For example, one inner person may need glasses to read, or has a certain disease, and another inner person does not need glasses or does not have this disease. Also, the blood picture or the brainwave activity differentiates this if you come from one person, inner person, to another inner person. So this is also from a biological or medical point of view very interesting. What is happening during those so-called switches.
And where did you find all this information?
Yeah, you find all this information in the books by therapists. Maybe just to name a few, you have a great book by Dr. Alison Miller, which deals with mind control. You have, I can show you some. You have, for example, I take it here. Randy Noblet, show it for the viewers. He has wrote several books, and the book that I show now, which is called Ritual Abuse in the 21st Century, is special because it contains contributions by a number of therapists and survivors and people working with survivors from different countries. If I look here at the cover page, you have contributors from the United States, from Germany, from South Africa, from the UK, from Greece, from Australia, from Israel. So you can see this is a phenomenon which is not only happening in the United States, where it was first becoming popular in the 90s by survivors' accounts, but also in countries all over the world. And this is which I can confirm, that if you look at the German literature of therapists, of German therapists working with German patients or German survivors, that you find the same aspects and the same patterns. So this is also therefore interesting, because it shows that the perpetrators are somehow connected, because they must use the same techniques, they must exchange knowledge in order to be able to use those same programs to create the same inner persons for certain tasks. This is a strong indication that we are not only dealing with local cults and local family structures, but that those local cults are internationally connected and maybe aiming at a global agenda, which means they want to introduce like a satanic world order, and they're using those programmed perpetrators and victims for this for this purpose.
Yeah. How did you find out, or how can you know that all the stuff that you are talking about is not just happening here and there, but it's actually a global network?
On one hand, you have to say that the perpetrators seem to be very influential, and this can be seen by certain well-known cases of murder and abuse, where somehow the perpetrators got away, and where it was not possible for the law enforcement to get to the bottom of this case. One example is a well-known case in Belgium, the so-called Dutroux case, where, and this might not be very known in the US, where several girls were missing, and some of them later found dead. And in the end, there was one individual with the last name Dutroux, which was held responsible for those crimes. It became apparent that he also had, I think, one or two helpers, but it seemed, or it not only seemed, it was evident that there was a lot more behind it, because there were a number of indications pointing to a network behind this Dutroux. It was said that he was supplying an elite network with those children, or with those young girls or women, but it was never able to prove this. Why? Because during, or in the course of the trials, more than a dozen witnesses came to death. And even a documentary by a major German news or television channel made had a look on this. So you have to ask yourself, how is it possible, if it's just a single perpetrator or a small group of 2 or 3 perpetrators, that more than a dozen witnesses come to death during the trials. Even, for example, a state attorney who took over the case and that allegedly did suicide. So it was very clear that there is a powerful group with the logistics behind it that was able to bring all those witnesses out of the way, so they cannot tell the court what they know about the background. This is just one case. Another very important case for me is the so-called Franklin scandal, which some Americans may know, in Omaha, Nebraska, which was where the U.S. attorney John DeCamp published a book on it. He was not only an attorney, but also sat in a commission which examined those crimes there. It were a number of abuse cases and also murders in Omaha, Nebraska. And it was reported by the youth there, the victims, that they took part, for example, in private flights to Washington, where they abused by high-ranking politicians and so on. And although you had a number of witnesses that made testimonies and named the same persons as perpetrators, at the end, almost no one came to prison. Just one of the perpetrators was, I think, sent to prison because of crimes committed in another part of the US. But the main perpetrators were free. Just one of them was later on sentenced by a civil court to bigger fine regarding one of the victims by the name of Paul Bonacci. But Paul Bonacci never received the money. But this Paul Bonacci, and it's interesting to mention it here, he was not only a victim of abuse, and, for example, confirmed that some of those victims of those young men were brought to the White House for prostitution purposes. And there's even a headline of, I think, the I have to look it up. New York Times and Washington. I think it was the Washington Post, which is speaking the headline of midnight tours to the to the White House by those prostitutes, by those male prostitutes, which were not actually prostitutes, but programmed or at least trained or conditioned victims of abuse that were used for this purpose. And he not only mentions this abuse, he also talks about taking part in a snuff film production at Bohemian Grove. And more interestingly, he also describes that he took part in MKULTRA in a military base near Omaha, Nebraska. And I even filed a request under the Freedom of Information Act asking for documents regarding Paul Bonacci in the context of MKULTRA, and I received an answer by the CIA, and they said, and that's a very interesting response. I can read it out here. They told me regarding my request concerning Paul Bonacci in the context of a mind control project located at Offutt Air Force Base, they answered, "We have completed a thorough review of your request and have determined, in accordance with Section 3.6a of Executive Order 13526, the CIA can neither confirm nor deny the existence or non-existence of records responsive to your request." So I explicitly asked, and I read out here my request as well, for all documents regarding a person by the name of Paul Bonacci or his code name West Lee, regarding a mind control project located at Offutt Air Force Base. I also asked for all documents regarding a person by the name of Bill Clemens, regarding a mind control project located at Offutt Air Force Base. And this person was named by Paul Bonacci. And I also mentioned a code, which is D64137A2, program XPY Eagle Alex Hope. And this code was used by John DeCamp in a court hearing to trigger another personality part of Paul Bonacci under the MKUltra program, because the information he wanted to use in this trial was not present in the conscious mind of Paul Bonacci. Therefore, and I don't know how he did find out about this trigger, about this code, he used it, and you have even a video recording on it on YouTube, to call out or to call in front this personality part which took part in MKUltra. And if you now look at the answer of the CIA, which says we can neither confirm nor deny the existence or non-existence of those records responsive to my request, you have to wonder why aren't they able to just say we don't have those records if those records do not exist. And such an answer is called a glommer, how's it called? Glommer response. It's called a glommer response, and by using this wording, it indicates that such records indeed do exist. But if the CIA would say we don't have those records, they would lie, and maybe someone later finds out that they have those records and that they lied, which they cannot do. But on the other hand, they cannot say we do have those records, but they are confidential, and publishing those records would endanger national security. They also cannot say, because then you would know that what Paul Bonacci said about MKUltra at Offutt Air Force Base is true. So they use the so-called Glommer response and said, we can neither confirm nor deny. And this is very interesting, because I asked a similar question regarding Katy O'Brien, and also one of her alleged perpetrators by the name of, I just have to think it up. One moment. I forgot his name. Okay, Kino. Now I have it. Who is a Satanist, and that at the same time mentioned by her as a perpetrator, Lieutenant Michael Colonel Kino. Just forgot his name. And regarding my request for documents concerning records on Katy O'Brien, a very famous MKUltra survivor, and Lieutenant Colonel Michael Aquino, I received the same answer, saying we can neither confirm nor deny the existence or non-existence of those documents. Again, indicating by this Glommer response that such records do exist, but that they are not able to confirm it, because when they would confirm it, they would at least confirm that the story told by Katy O'Brien is, at least in some aspects, true. Yeah. So this is one thing, that you have those very influential persons behind the satanic cults. And the other thing is what I mentioned, that there is indeed an exchange of information, and also exchange of victims, and also exchange of trainers or perpetrators worldwide, which is also documented in the expert literature by therapists, which speaks for such a global organization behind the phenomenon. And I also stumbled about a very, very important, unique witness, and this person is called Swali. Swali claims to have been a chief programmer of the so-called Illuminati. And if you speak about or hear about the Illuminati, you normally think this is conspiracy theory, something like this does not exist. However, there are a number of survivors who name the perpetrators group Illuminati. And you even find letters 200 years old to the first president of the US, to Washington, where the author of this letter is warning President Washington, who was also a Freemason. He was warning him about an infiltration of the North American Freemason lodges by the Illuminati. So you even had this conspiracy theory 200 years ago. Although you might think this is a modern theory of the internet age, person spoke about this even 200 years ago. And this witness called Swali is describing in detail that she worked for the Illuminati, that she even took over the job of a chief programmer in mind control laboratories of the Illuminati by Joseph Mengele again. And you find her information on her own webpage. She published a lot of detailed information about mind control and what she experiences in this function. And therefore I was in the beginning very skeptic and didn't use this information for the first part of my book, Dark New World Order, because I thought this cannot be true, that someone is speaking about Illuminati and in detail about the horrific crimes, what happened there, and about the Jesuits being one of the highest level in the hierarchy of those perpetrator groups. But on one hand, I also realized that Dr. Alison Miller, in her expert book on mind control, mentions Swali several times, which shows that this experts apparently thinks that what Swali says is legitimate and makes sense. But even more astonishing, I read one of her texts where she describes a so-called brainwave programming, which means a child is conditioned to be to become a certain inner persons during a certain brainwave state. So this is when I understood what delta programming actually means, because we all know the brainwave activity can change between different frequencies. We have the alpha frequency, the beta frequency. For example, the alpha frequency is known to be a state where you are very relaxed. It's the entrance state if you get into light hypnosis, for example. The theta state is a very deep trance state, for example. And I learned from Swali that brainwave programming means that the perpetrators use extreme pain. So the child has to learn to be a certain inner persons while it is in this certain frequency range, for example, of delta. So a delta inner personality part is a inner personality part which at the same time has this delta brainwave activity. And the beta inner person is an inner person which at the same time has this beta brainwave activity. And thus it is possible by using conditioning techniques, especially pain, that a child learns to keep in this frequency range. And this is corroborated by a painting in Dr. Alison Miller's book, where a very well-known survivor, which has written a book by herself, has drawn a picture showing where she is tied to a chair with a kind of helmet on his head. And this helmet is used to monitor her brainwave activity. And a note at the side of this picture says, certain brainwaves are used for certain inner persons. So I learned from Swali what actually is brainwave programming. And she mentions certain programs, that those certain programs are, or that certain colors are attributed to those programs. For example, the Theta program is used for also for, just as an example, for satanic ritual activities, and is attributed to the color black. And the delta inner persons are used for another certain type of activities, and the color blue is attributed to the delta program. And what I found, to my great surprise, was that in a book written by a German therapist together with her patient, whom she worked for about a decade, the same technique of brainwave programming, but also the same programs with the same colors and the same names are mentioned. So this shows Swali has described a certain kind of programming which can indeed be found, at least in this case of a German survivor, which on the other hand shows that some of the information submitted by Swali must be true. And therefore we can assume that what she says about the Illuminati also is true, and that we are dealing here with a worldwide organization that has infiltrated not only certain parts of the military and the CIA, but is working together with local cults, which is in detail described by Swali how this works. And you find, for example, celebrities which also seem to be in this program. For example, if you look at the video of Katy, she's called the famous singer Katy
Perry.
Katy Perry, yeah, Katy Perry, and her video Wide Awake. If you look at this video with the knowledge on mind control techniques, you see this video describes in detail a mind control story. You're shown dissociation when she's looking at the mirror. Then you're shown her core personality part, a little girl named by her true name, Catherine, that tries to help her get out of this inner prison or this inner world. And it is shown how she tries to get out, but in the end does not succeed. But once again gets on the stage as a butterfly, which is a reference to the so-called Project Monarch, where the butterfly is the symbol for the victims of this Project Monarch, and so on. You have a number of those indications. In one moment you have, for example, a hypnosis cat with eyes rolling like those typical hypnosis symbols, and so on. So we are shown here, and this is similar to the use of satanic symbols or the widespread use of satanic symbols in the music industry. For example, you have a number of German rap artists using satanic symbols in their videos, which shows that apparently those perpetrators called Illuminati have infiltrated wide areas of our society, in particular those areas which have influence on other humans or youth, like Hollywood and the music industry. So in the end, there are a number of indications that speak for a worldwide conspiracy.
Yeah, and why do they show this in videos? Because usually it's not the artist who creates the content for a video, but it's a company who decides this is how the video is going to look like for the song. And why do they do that? Yeah.
If you take, for example, the video "Wide Awake" by Katy Perry, this is definitely, or I assume, not Katy Perry's idea to have this story, this mind control story shown in her video. But on one hand, there's only a very small percentage of, I will call them, awakened persons that understand what is shown in this video. If it was clear for the general public, there would have been discussed this video at least. But as you know, no one spoke about it. it was not clear for most of the people. On the other hand, it shows to those who are victims themselves or are working with the Illuminati the power of and the influence of this organization, because it shows to them, we can do this. We can show you a whole mind control story in one of the world's most famous artists, and no one doesn't either understand or care. And the same with the widespread use of satanic symbols. However, you must say, in some cases, the artists themselves play a part in it, because you can see them, for example, with tattoos on their skin, displaying satanic symbols or similar. But normally, you can say it are the production companies that somehow seem to work together or for the Illuminati that are producing this. And you can see it very good in the German rap industry. You could say it is used, for example, for promotion purposes or something similar, and could be a pure chance that in one or the other video such symbols are shown, but the spread or the number of those incidents where those symbols are shown is too big to explain it by this. So I would say, in the first instance, it's a demonstration of power, and this is also described by a survivor. If you use certain symbols in the mind control process, whenever those survivors see those symbols again, for example, in videos, it not only shows the power of their perpetrators, but at the same time is a reinforcement of their programming, because the trigger is shown again. For example, if a pyramid is used, or the all-seeing eye in a pyramid is used as a trigger for certain parts, if they over and over see those all-seeing eye in the pyramid, the programming is reinforced. So this is another explanation.
Yeah. Every normal person would say, okay, if that all happens there in this industry or in general, why doesn't the victim just leave?
Yeah. Leaving is for the victory almost impossible, because the perpetrators use such sophisticated and cruel techniques that make it impossible for a victim to leave, that this is definitely no real choice. For example, one technique I've mentioned earlier, by deleting the confidence or trust of this person in other persons, they learn from their childhood on that they cannot trust, for example, police or even a therapist. And it is well known that also therapists and even clinics work together with the perpetrators. So even going to a therapist does not mean that this person is safe then. Then you have, for example, sophisticated mind control techniques by which the perpetrators install in the inner world of those victims. For example, I mentioned it before, a reporter inner person. And this inner person always reports to the cult when this victim is talking to outsiders. Or, for example, a therapist found out, sometimes after months or years, that after each session, there was a switch in their patient, and another inner person, this reporter personality part, went to the phone, called the cult, and explained to them what they found out in the therapy. And the cult could decide if they had to execute certain means to prevent further disclosure. Then you have suicide parts or self-harming parts. So whenever the person or during a therapy, the therapist and the patient together find out something about the cult, automatically this suicide inner personality part is triggered. And for example, this German therapist that wrote together with a patient this book, and the book is called Unabhängige, describes that there were several incidents where she could save her patient, the therapist could save her patient in the last minute because her patient tried to kill herself because such a suicide program was triggered. And furthermore, you have this widespread influence of the perpetrators, which is mentioned by many survivors and which is shown by the Franklin scandal or this Dutroux case from Belgium, which also makes it very, very difficult to go to the police. For example, one witness of an abuse case from Germany told me he was in the office of the state attorney because he accompanied a victim to the police, which first didn't want to go to the police, but he persuaded her to go. And the Attorney General stood up and he said he wanted to thank him for his braveness, but he screamed at him and said, if you once again stick your nose in such a case, it will have severe consequences for you. So you never know who is working together with the perpetrators, and all this together makes it nearly impossible for survivors to speak about it. And furthermore, last point, normally survivors do not remember what has happened to them because their everyday personality part, which goes to work and so on, it does not know about the abuse because the abuse and the crimes were experienced by other personality parts, and those personality parts are divided by so-called amnesic barriers, which means one person does not know of the other person. And so this is another aspect why it's so difficult to find out more. And we can be really happy that we now have all this expert literature where therapists found out during the course of years working with their patients what happens in those family structures and in those mind control projects by the intelligence community and military.
Yeah, so how does a victim usually find out, and how does a victim know, or someone else that the victim goes to and tells their story?
Yeah.
How do they know this is something that actually happens, or how do they even find out?
Yeah, it's a very good question. As I explained before, usually they don't know. They just know, or the normal day person just knows that something is wrong with them. For example, they have missing time, which means over a period of some hours or maybe even days, they cannot remember what happened. because during this time, another personality part was out or was active. And they wonder why do they have those memory gaps? Or they have other psychological disorders like anxiety, like even it might be flashbacks, which they cannot explain, where they see blood or something, or a or disturbing environment, but they have no idea why they have been there, what exactly did happen there, because you have to take into account that normally, not only in the MKULTRA project, but also the cult victims, the children are under drugs like LSD or other drugs which are used during the rituals. Also in order to enable the dissociation, but also to make it more difficult for them to remember. Normally they have those problems and those flashbacks, and it might happen that at one point in time they even remember or assume that they might have experienced abuse. And they go to a therapist, and normally it is that they first find out about the abuse. If they don't have remembered before, they normally remember in the course of the therapy that that they were a victim of abuse in childhood, normally by family members. And then later on, just in the course of the therapy, they found out about the ritual aspects, because those are the most horrible and most traumatic aspects of their experiences. And therefore, it takes longer if the psyche of those persons permits the person to find out, because since forgetting those memories or blocking those memories is a coping mechanism, usually the subconscious will only permit the person to remember if the subconscious assumes that the person is stable enough to consciously cope with those memories. So this would be a typical way of finding out about what has happened.
Yeah, now we have this this word false memory syndrome. Maybe you can explain that.
Yeah, false memory syndrome is a term coined by an organization called False Memory Syndrome Foundation, which contains a number of members, or even the founders, which a very questionable background, you can say. You can even read now in Wikipedia that two of those founders at least made remarks remarks that showed that they were not against pedophilia, but supported it. You can read this in Wikipedia that I think one of those members gave an interview in a Dutch pedophile magazine. And if you research what or who are the advisory committee members of this foundation, or the psychological advisors, you find out that some of those names also appear in the MKULTRA project. They also worked for the CIA, those psychologists. So therapists were confronted in the 90s that suddenly those term false memory emerged, promoted by the False Memory Syndrome Foundation, which and the approach was that those advocates of the False Memory Foundation said what those survivors explained are not actual memories, but that those are memories that have confabulated by the therapists together with the patients. So you can say that those memories were somehow planted or seeded by the therapists in the minds of their patients, those memories of abuse, of satanic rituals, and so on. And the consequence was, or the legal consequence was, that therapists feared to be sued by the family members that were accused by their patients, because those family members try to obtain large sums of money in front of civil courts by suing those therapists, which would have ruined them and would have made them impossible to continue their work. So this was a severe problem for therapists, and some or quite a number of them even refused to work together anymore with such cult survivors or survivors of ritual abuse and mind control, because they feared being sued. However, you must say a false memory indeed can happen. There are scientists that have shown that it is possible even to implant false memories in the minds of persons with certain techniques. So it is not totally impossible that false memories occur. However, if we take those cult survivors and if we take into account that therapists found inner persons and exact programs and the same details described by them and the same patterns, we can be very sure that in these cases where you find a delta inner part, a beta inner part, and so on, and you can even observe switches between those inner parts, these are no false memories. These are actual psychological diseases and actual inner parts that have been intentionally produced by the perpetrators. So the idea of the therapists and the survivors is that this false memory syndrome foundation was intentionally installed by maybe also the CIA and cult members to work against the so-called satanic panic phenomenon in the 1990s, which means that suddenly a number of survivors spoke out on MKULTRA and satanic abuse, and this was an approach to work against this.
So how does a victim get out at all? How do these people survive?
Yeah, I think in the end, the soul of this survivor, if you want to name it like this, has to be strong enough to withstand all those techniques, not to give in, or even if this victim itself became a perpetrator and tortured or even killed other children, that at some point in his life he somehow find a source that he can use to heal. For example, I met a German female survivor, and this happens also with Swali, that became very religious or developed a strong faith in God, and this helped her to overcome this satanic abuse and satanic influence. But you must say, apparently this only a few of the victims are able to get out. The majority, it appears, becomes later on perpetrators themselves, and continue this agenda.
And do you know how they even find their way out? Since you said it's possible that wherever they go, they will meet someone who's actually not on their side, like the policeman that you mentioned, or a therapist.
On one hand, we can assume that there is no 100% control, that not each police station, each clinic, each therapist is somehow under control of the Illuminati, or how you will call this organization. On the other hand, it seems that the cult, in some instances, the cult loses interest in those victims at a certain age. If they are over their 30s, it seems that they cannot be used anymore. And as long as the cult does not have to fear that these victims might present any proof for those crimes, they let them talk. Normally they would have the options, and this also happens, that they try to reinstall the programming. This happens with some survivors, that they are caught again by cult members and tortured again, and are brought to don't speak out anymore about what they experienced. But in other cases, the cult members can be sure there is no evidence, and if the victim is more interested in healing than in exposing the perpetrators, that seems to be okay for them.
Do you have any idea how common this is? Like how many victims there are? So let's say I walk down the streets, and how many people might be a victim of something like that?
Yeah, it's very, very difficult to estimate this number, because we usually only find single cases, and the reason for this is, we've talked about the reason for this, because only a few manage to get out of it and find their way to a therapist, or find a way to publicly speak about their experiences. However, there was in Germany a survey, and this survey only referred to a small part of Germany, where therapists were asked, did you ever work with survivors of ritual abuse? And during this survey, which also only, I think it was conducted in 2005 and 2007, also referred to a certain period of time. And even in this small survey, there were about 112 cases of ritual abuse, which were which were estimated by the therapists at legitimate or as convincing. So even in the small survey, there were over 100 cases. If you would make a survey in the whole country and about a bigger period of time, or larger period of time, you would even easily come to some 100 cases. And those some 100 cases are not taking into account the hidden cases. So we can suspect that even in Germany, we're dealing with some hundred to maybe some thousand victims only here. So worldwide, we can estimate there's several thousands of victims.
And can you say if this topic actually affects everyone, or how it affects everyone, so that it's not just let's say some thousand victims in one country, but that we all have to do with it somehow?
I understand. First of all, becoming a direct victim of a satanic cult is not very likely, because, as I mentioned before, the victims come out of their own family. They are born into those satanic families. They even use so-called breeders, which are women in the cult, with the sole purpose of giving life to babies, which are used either for rituals where they are killed, or they are trained as later perpetrators. You find those cases in the expert literature as well, where they're called, the translation of the German term would be like the rubbish kids, which means those kids are only born to be used later on in the training of other children. And at one point of time in their life, this means they are killed by the hand of another children in the course of a ritual. So regarding the victims themselves, the number might be some hundred in a country, or maybe some thousand, which is not much in comparison to the whole population. For example, in Germany of more than 80 million inhabitants. However, those cults seem to be very tricky and very successful in positioning cult members in influential positions in society. If it's politics, if it's the industry, if it's banks, and so on. Or the music industry, the movie industry. So by having their members in those positions, or being able to bringing persons in those influential positions under their control by using, for example, minor children that are programmed for sex services, and bringing them together, for example, in a party where they are drugging the target person and making, for example, then a film of a situation where this influential person is together with maybe a 12-year-old girl, which has conditioned for sexual services. They have power over this person for their whole life. So even with a comparable small number of victims and of persons working for them, those cults seem to be very influential, which is, for example, shown in those cases that I mentioned, the Franklin scandal and the Dutroux case, where there must have been persons on the side of the perpetrators in positions, in high positions in police, in the office of the general attorney, and so on. And also controlling media in some degree, because no one was able to find out more and report on the background on the background of those crimes publicly. So this is the problem, that they are able to influence wide parts of our society with a comparable low number of helpers.
Yeah, another question I had is, when we hear the word Satanism, is it just about rituals, or is there more than that?
If we indeed speak about Satanism and not about other deities or gods, which are also found in the work of therapists, that they found out, for example, that a survivor describes that his family or cult was worshipping some Nordic god or whatever, but in many cases this god is called Satan. First of all, the ritual aspect is the most important aspect. Over and over again are described those rituals, which also show that the perpetrators indeed believe in the Satanism and in the non-worthly aspects of all of this, in the worshipping of demons, in calling up demons, in the energetic aspects of the rituals and so on, which is demonstrated by the actions. Yeah. For example, the killing of babies or of fetuses is described again and again, and also cannibalism. So this shows that these are not only adults coming together saying, oh, we are doing something like worshipping Satan. This could be funny, and we could also use it for other purposes. No, those persons are 100% believing in what they are doing. Otherwise, you cannot explain how it's able or how they are able, for example, to practice cannibalism. Furthermore, the survivors also mentioned that energetic aspects are important. For example, blood drinking is reported again and again, because the perpetrators are convinced that by drinking the blood of the victims, they are taking up their energy and so on. Or survivors describe how the cult used them by torture and drugs as a kind of channel for demonic entities and things like that. So this is the most important aspect. However, as I described before, those cult members do not only practice satanic rituals, but are active in our society in many ways. For example, in normal, often influential jobs or positions, like in politics or in the management of a bank and so on. But also they are connected to other fields of organized crime, like prostitution, drug dealing, human trafficking, and so on, in order to earn money, in order to spread their influence, and so on. So you can say, in our everyday life, you would normally don't recognize a person as being a cult member, because he has learned and is intelligent enough not to behave suspiciously. But the rituals are the inner core of this agenda, with the aim of introducing, and this is also described by therapists and the survivors, a satanic world order. However, we do not know exactly what this satanic world order will look like. But their major goal is to widen their influence globally and to take more and more parts of our society under their control. And we can only assume how much control they already gathered.
Yeah, what I'm often wondering is, how is it possible that the people we see on the screen, whether it be celebrities or politicians and so on, how is it possible that they seem so normal? They seem, many seem to be very nice and compassionate and have a lot of humor. And from the outside, it's totally difficult to understand how such a person could do any bad thing.
It's easy to explain because normally this has much to do with the personality split those persons experienced. So if you see them on TV or during concert or in an interview, normally their everyday personality part is active, or maybe even a personality part which is especially trained for those kind of public activities. If, and I cannot say if all those celebrities connected to the cult, if they do still participate in those rituals and how often they do it. But if we think of such a celebrity taking part in rituals, this would be achieved by triggering in the right moment another personality part which has learned to handle a ritualistic knife and to kill another person or children, or to kill children. So the personality part that you see on TV does not even know that maybe the night before he took part in a ritual as a witness or even as a perpetrator. This is what those children have learned from very early on, and explains that you cannot imagine how such a friendly person could do something horrible like this.
Yeah, I mean, that is referring to the victims. What about perpetrators?
Yeah.
I mean, they don't all have personality disorder.
Yeah. Right? On one hand, you must say that usually a perpetrator has been a victim at the beginning. Usually, at least those perpetrators coming from satanic families, when they were born, they were innocent children. They have been made to perpetrators. Another kind of perpetrators would be those outside the cult, but working together, maybe with cults. In these cases, it could be in their personality, that they are sadistic, for example. Those others have learned to behave like this, and behaving like perpetrators without feeling remorse. And maybe we have another third category of perpetrators, which are under a certain external influence. which maybe, act under influence, permitting crimes under this influence, where they do not behave like a human any longer. And I'm referring here, for example, to what German survivor Sandra Rasch has told me, that she has been used for the channel for those dark beings.
Yeah, I think we covered all the main questions I had. Do you want to add anything?
No, I think we gave a good overview and also discussed some details of it. I just can say, if anyone wants to read up what we have talked about, he can, for example, look at the book of Dr. Alison Miller. But if you look on Amazon or whatever under the term ritual abuse, you find a number of other books by US therapists or even German therapists, if you're able to read German. Or you can look up all the sources. In my book, I have a long list of literature, and I think about 700 footnotes, where I also mentioned those surveys and so on. I think it's important not to only hear about this, but with the sources I mentioned, everyone is able to confirm. For example, to look at the Greenbaum speech that you can find for free in the internet, and to learn more details about what we have talked about today.
Yeah, so where can we find your book?
It's available on Amazon, the English version, Dark New World Order. So you find it under my name or under the title. Yeah.
Wonderful. And they are both, your books are available in English and German, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Wonderful. Yeah, thank you so much for coming.
I thank you for the invitation.
Yeah, and maybe we'll have a next show soon, or maybe in the next year. And yeah, that was Dr. Marcel Polte as my guest, and that was Colors of the Universe here on Ascension Radio KMPQ.
Thank you for listening to Colors of the Universe here on KMPQ Ascension Radio. If you feel inspired, please spread the message. Visit us on radio.ampeg.org or try our social media. And now, have a colorful day.